The courtroom was too bright. That's what I noticed first, the glare off the polished floors, the way it bounced off the pale walls and caught on the brass of the judge's nameplate. I adjusted my coat, kept walking. Ellis turned when he saw me. The smirk came slowly, like he'd practiced it. Dana leaned in, whispered something behind her hand, and laughed too loudly. Her bracelet clinked against the table as she crossed her arms. Her nails were red, always red. I didn't look at them. The bailiff called my name. Nora Callan, responding party. My heels echoed as I approached the defendant's table. I sat down, smoothed the hem of my skirt, and folded my hands in my lap. I didn't need to see Ellis's face to know he was enjoying this. The judge flipped through the file. His eyes skimmed the first page, then the second. He paused, looked again. Wait. He glanced at the plaintiff's counsel. She's the one you're suing. The air shifted. Even the court clerk stopped typing. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing just slightly. I've read the declaration. Claims of diminished capacity mismanagement of estate assets, potential need for conservatorship. He turned to me. Mrs. Callan, how old are you? 66, Your Honor. And do you currently live alone? Yes. Employed, retired, budget analysis, City Finance Department, 32 years. He nodded slowly. Noted. Dana's face had gone still. Ellis shifted in his chair, adjusting his cuffs as if they'd gotten too tight. The judge tapped his pen twice. Let's proceed with today's preliminary review. But I'd like to see the supporting evidence for these allegations. All of it. He didn't say it unkindly, but it was the kind of voice that broke apart performances. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. Behind me, someone opened a notebook. The sound scratched across the silence. I watched the edge of Dana's expression as she leaned toward their lawyer. Her mouth moved, but I didn't need to hear the words. They'd prepared for a different version of me, and I hadn't even opened my folder yet. The first letter came folded in a white envelope with my name printed in clean, professional typeface. No return address, just the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it in the kitchen, setting aside my tea to read. It started with pleasantries. Dear Mrs. Callan, we represent Mr. Ellis Callan in the matter of family financial concern. My eyes skimmed over legal phrases I'd heard 100 times before in my years with the city, except this time I wasn't behind the desk. I was the target. They wanted documents, tax records, trust details. The letter ended with a soft warning. Our client expresses concern about your ability to manage ongoing financial responsibilities. I didn't sleep that night. The second letter came a week later. Firmer tone, mentioned patterns of confusion, suggested an evaluation. I sat at my desk and reread the opening line until it blurred. I had kept Ellis's baby shoes in the top drawer of that desk for years. I opened the drawer and touched them like they might steady me. By the third letter, I wasn't surprised, just tired. This one included a draft petition, conservatorship, suggested I lacked capacity to handle complex transactions. Ellis's name appeared in bold, petitioner Ellis James Callan. He hadn't called, not once, not even a message. I sat at the kitchen table and looked around the house I'd paid off with night shifts and silent sacrifice. I remembered the look on his face when I handed him the down payment for his first home. I remembered helping Dana pick out centerpieces for their wedding, even when she never asked for my opinion. Now, he wanted to claim I couldn't tell the difference between a balance sheet and a grocery list. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Ellis. I called Martin, the estate attorney who helped set up the trust after Harold died. He picked up on the second ring. Nora. I told him what I'd received. There was a pause. Let's meet, he said. Bring everything. So I opened the drawer, took out the letters, and the ledger I hadn't shown anyone in 25 years. He used to sit on the porch every evening just before 6, watching the street for Harold's car. Sometimes he'd fall asleep, curled up on the swing book in his lap, head resting on a pillow I kept by the door just for him. The porch light stayed on until I finally carried him inside. Harold died on a Tuesday morning. I remember the phone ringing, the nurse saying massive and sudden. I remember the sound of Ellis's cereal bowl hitting the floor when I dropped the phone. He was 7. I didn't cry in front of him. That week I sold Harold's car. I found a night shift at the hospital doing intake. I kept my daytime city job. I stopped buying orange juice. I cut my hair short because I didn't have time to dry it before work. I sold the engagement ring for half of what it was worth and paid off our utility debt. I didn't go back to church for 3 years. Sunday mornings became grocery runs and meal prepping for the week. When Ellis turned 10, I saved enough to send him to a science camp he'd read about in the back of a magazine. I made tuna sandwiches for myself for dinner 5 nights in a row to make it happen. When he was 16, I skipped my yearly doctor's appointment so I could buy him a suit for an internship at a financial firm downtown. He looked like Harold that day, straight-backed and serious, standing in front of the hallway mirror adjusting his tie. When he got his acceptance letter to college, I drove to 3 different banks to put together a private loan in my name. I didn't want him starting his life under the weight of numbers. I watched him cross the stage at graduation and thought, I did it. I did enough. And now that boy, that suit-wearing, tie-fixing, porch-waiting boy, is in court trying to prove I can't be trusted. I pressed the folder closed and slid it across Martin's desk. He looked at me, then at the envelope on top. Dana's smile never quite reached her eyes. It was tight at the corners, practiced like a sales pitch. I'd seen it often at the rehearsal dinner at Ellis's birthday last year, even when she brought over that store-bought pie and insisted I take the night off from cooking. Politeness wrapped in sugar. 3 months ago, she'd come by on a Sunday morning. Said she wanted to help me organize things, make everything digital in case of emergency. You know, just in case something ever happened. It's what my parents are doing too. I didn't want her going through my files, but Ellis had just dropped off some groceries and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. So I nodded. Told her she could scan copies, nothing original. She sat at my desk for nearly 2 hours. When I walked back in with tea, she had already labeled half the folders. You really do keep everything, she said. I smiled, then unsure whether it was a compliment or not. Weeks passed. I logged into my bank account and saw alerts I hadn't set. A new user profile had been added. I changed the password, flagged it. The bank called to confirm an update to my power of attorney. I told them I never submitted one. They emailed me a scanned copy. It had my name, my address, my driver's license front and back. The signature looked like mine, but slanted wrong. The loop on the R was tighter, the baseline uneven. It was a version of my name I hadn't written. I sat there, holding the printout in my hands, knowing exactly how they'd done it. Dana had smiled when she left that day. Said she'd saved everything to a flash drive and would send me a copy. She never did. I walked into the spare room where I kept the fireproof box. I opened it slowly. Passport, deeds, medical directives. The originals were all there. But the trust document was out of order. The divider marked legal had been moved. 1 page was missing. I knew which one before I even looked. After Harold died, I let a lot go. The lake property went first too expensive to maintain, too far to reach on my own. Then the stocks we'd built up through his old firm. I cashed them, quietly used part of the money to set up a savings account in Ellis's name for college, even though he didn't know it yet. I sold the second car, cut down the insurance, pared life down to what I could carry by myself. But I kept the house. Even when I had to refinance it 10 years ago to help Ellis and Dana buy theirs, I never changed the name on the deed, never added anyone, never borrowed more than I could pay back. I let the kitchen go outdated. I patched the roof myself one summer when the contractor's quote felt more like insult then assistants. I lived with the creaks in the floor and the draft in the guest room because it still smelled like Harold's shirts. It was the only place where every sacrifice lived quietly beside me. So when I flipped to the last page of the petition and saw the line about liquidation of jointly influenced property for equitable redistribution, my breath caught. They meant the house. Dana must have coached the language. That was her way, using polite legal fog to bury cruelty. Martin saw my face as I set the document down. "We'll respond," he said gently but firm. "You're the sole title holder. Their argument won't hold." I nodded, but I couldn't quite speak. Because it wasn't just about title or law. It was about memory. About mornings in that kitchen before school. About Harold's muddy boots by the back door. About Ellis learning to ride a bike down the driveway, the same one they now wanted to price divide and sell. They could take paperwork, try to rewrite intention, but this house, this was the last thing that hadn't been touched. Until now. Martin handed me a pen and pointed to the section where we'd need to list assets for defense. I started with the house. Then I paused. And I wrote a second line. The second hearing moved quickly. Motions, exhibits, objections noted for later review. I kept my hands still, my back straight. I didn't look at Ellis or Dana. Their lawyer spoke in careful tones, using words like concern, family intention, intergenerational transition. I waited. When it was my attorney's turn to respond, he stood and said, "We reserve full rebuttal for trial, Your Honor, but we'd like to flag several inconsistencies in the petition and request a private conference regarding the respondent's protected documents." Judge Lansing glanced up. Protected how medical and financial, both connected to documents allegedly submitted without consent. There was a pause. Then Judge Lansing shifted his chair, leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Callan, you worked in city finance, didn't you?" "Yes, Your Honor." 32 years. He nodded slowly. "Your husband, Harold Callan. He passed from cardiac arrest in '99. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Yes. I remember him," Lansing said. "You came to probate court. I was clerking under Judge Riley then. Your son was with you. He colored spaceships in the margins of the filing papers." I heard Ellis shift behind me. Judge Lansing looked down at the petition again. "Let's take a brief recess. Counsel for both parties' chambers, please." Ellis stood too quickly, knocking his pen from the table. Dana touched his wrist, murmured something. She still didn't look at me. In the hallway outside the chamber, I stood next to Martin while the others filed in. The door clicked shut behind us. Judge Lansing motioned to the small conference table. "I'm not here to relitigate a family's emotions," he said. "But I remember this woman, and I remember the way she spoke about protecting her son. I'd like to know why that same son is now questioning her capacity with a forged signature and a suspicious power of attorney." Martin opened the file. He didn't speak, he just laid out the documents one by one. The video still. The banking flags. The notarized letter from my doctor dated 1 week before Ellis's. When we stepped back into the courtroom, the bailiff handed the judge a folder. He didn't open it yet. He just looked at Ellis. I had kept that folder for years, never thinking I'd need it. It started small, just a habit from my years in finance. Every receipt, every statement, every call logged and dated. Harold used to tease me for it. "You've got a file for every breath we take," he'd say, and I'd smile because keeping records was how I stayed calm when life didn't give second chances. After he died, the habit deepened. Order became my comfort. Paper told the truth when people couldn't. When Judge Lansing asked about verification, I didn't hesitate. I told Martin where to look. Bottom drawer, locked cabinet, right side of the study. He drove to the house that night. The folder wasn't fancy, just a blue binder with peeling labels. Inside were 20 years of quiet proof, tax filings, correspondence, notarized letters, even the small things that didn't matter, until suddenly They did. Near the back, 3 pages were stapled together, my most recent medical affidavit, signed by Dr. Patel, dated 3 weeks before the so-called evaluation Ellis submitted. The ink was still bright. The signature matched. Below that, a flash drive taped to the binder's spine. I'd almost forgotten about it. The small home camera I'd installed after a break-in 5 years ago had captured Dana printing something in my office while I watered the garden. I hadn't realized she'd used my own computer. When Martin played it on his laptop, the footage was grainy but clear. Dana leaning forward, phone in one hand, my ID on the scanner bed. She smiled at something the person on the call said. "Yes, I'll get it today," she whispered. Martin copied everything, placed the binder in a sealed envelope, and handed it to the bailiff the next morning. In court, when Judge Lansing asked for evidence of fraud, Martin simply said, "We have more than enough." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Then I suggest we proceed carefully." Ellis looked at his lawyer. Dana looked at the floor. I folded my hands on the table and waited for the sound that would follow the moment truth finally hit paper. Ellis adjusted his jacket before walking to the witness stand. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the floor, then the judge, then the ceiling, anywhere but me. When he was sworn in, his voice came out softer than I remembered. He spoke about concern, about noticing patterns, how I had started forgetting where things were. He mentioned a check I'd written twice in 1 week, a voicemail I supposedly left where I confused a date. He said it all like it hurt him to say it, like he'd struggled with the decision to take this to court. Martin didn't interrupt. He just waited. When it was time for cross, he stood slowly and pulled the binder from his briefcase. "Mr. Callan," he said, "can you confirm your signature appears on these filings?" Ellis glanced over. "Yes." "And can you confirm that you submitted these medical concerns to the court based on an evaluation by Dr. Levin?" "Yes." Martin nodded. "Interesting." Then he stepped aside, and the screen behind him lit up. First, the affidavit from Dr. Patel appeared, notarized, dated before Dr. Levin's report, clearly stating I was of sound mind and fully capable of handling financial matters. Then came the time-stamped footage Dana at my desk scanning my ID. I saw Ellis's jaw tighten. Then Martin showed the access log from my bank account, noting the unusual login on the day Dana visited, followed by an unauthorized profile change. Judge Lansing leaned back in his chair, elbows resting on the armrests. He didn't speak, but the silence was worse than shouting. Dana's hand moved beneath the table. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering. The clerk whispered to the bailiff. Ellis opened his mouth, but no words came out. The mask was slipping. Judge Lansing finally broke the stillness. "We'll resume tomorrow morning," he said. "Counsel, please remain after session." Ellis stepped down from the stand, his hands clenched. He brushed past me without a glance. Dana followed slower, as if her shoes didn't fit anymore. I remained seated, watching them walk toward the doors. The ruling came quickly. Judge Lansing didn't prolong it. He summarized the facts, the contradictions, the evidence of manipulation. He noted the forged signature and the surveillance footage. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. "The court finds no basis for the petition," he said plainly. "All claims are dismissed with prejudice. No damages are awarded. Further, this court recommends review of materials submitted by the plaintiffs for potential fraud." Martin nodded beside me. I didn't move. When the gavel fell, it didn't echo. It just landed like a final breath that had taken weeks to draw. Outside, the sun had shifted across the lot. My feet hurt, but I kept walking. Mom Ellis called behind me. Not loudly, more like a reflex, as if he still believed I might turn around out of habit. I didn't. "Can we talk?" he asked. Dana stood beside him, arms folded, eyes on the ground. She said nothing. I passed them without pausing. Martin didn't speak either. He let the silence hold its shape. Ellis didn't follow. I don't think he knew what to say once the script ran out. At the car, I placed my bag in the back seat, and sat down carefully, hands on my lap. For a moment, I just breathed. I felt the edges of my name settle back into my skin like it had been on loan to someone else for too long. The house was still mine. The trust stood. And the file folder that had once felt like a burden now sat beside me like a shield I hadn't known I'd need. Martin got in the driver's seat. "You want to go back to your place?" he asked. I looked straight ahead. "No," I said. "Not yet." I wasn't ready to go home to the same walls just yet. Not before I understood how to live in them again without expecting the floor to fall out. He nodded, started the engine. We drove for a while without speaking, turning through streets that felt familiar and quiet. By the time I asked him to pull over, the light had changed. Weeks passed before I opened the door to the study again. I started with the surface. Old envelopes, court drafts, the stack of photocopies Martin had returned after the ruling. I shredded what no longer served a purpose, boxed up the rest for storage. The only thing I didn't touch was the bottom drawer. It took me 2 days to open it. Inside was the old Ledger navy cover, worn thin at the edges, spine still intact. I'd started it after Harold passed when Ellis was in 3rd grade. It wasn't for taxes or budgeting. It was for the things that didn't show up on forms. Page after page, cello lessons, field trip fees, co-pays, holiday plane tickets, lines for groceries when Ellis was in grad school. Checks sent just because on birthdays, when I suspected they were short on rent, but too proud to ask. There was the $27,000 I transferred when Dana lost her job, and they didn't tell anyone. The $5,000 I wired the day before their mortgage closed because a bank delay almost cost them the house. It was all there. Every sacrifice. Every yes that cost more than I admitted out loud. I didn't keep it for praise. I kept it because numbers were honest. They didn't twist the story or forget the details. I closed the ledger without adding a final entry. Nothing about the petition, nothing about the hearing. Some things didn't need ink to be remembered. The phone rang late one afternoon while I was repotting the plant in the corner. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. No message left. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was someone realizing too late what silence means when it's chosen, not imposed. I placed the ledger back into the drawer, not locked, but closed. The house was quiet again. Not hollow, just quiet. And somewhere in that quiet, I began to believe I could live in it without looking back every time I crossed the hall.